Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Adams Hernandez and I am a graduate student in the English department. I am also a stay-at-home mom to two amazing little boys. So if you hear any noise in the background, it's because they're really being entertained outside while mommy does the video. But anyhow, in 2019, in the fall of 2019 I should say, I took Dr. Blend's feminist theory class. And I was able to explore what my fellow feminists had to say about being a mom, which is what I'm going to be sharing with you today. Now, I have linked in or placed a link in the description below for you to be able to have a transcription of the video that you can follow along with while I read. So if you need to pause and follow, go follow that link, then that's perfectly fine. But I wanted to make sure you had a way to follow along because I do cover quite a bit of ground in this essay. And also I wanted you to be able to see the resources that I pulled from and that kind of influenced my essay in some way. So I hope that you enjoy. Feminism's Great Amnesia, Reclaiming the Fact of Motherhood. When my first son was born, I was working as a private school teacher, making about $29,000 annually. 18 months later, my second son came along, and my husband and I now had two children under 2 years old. So to give you an idea about the child care that we would have had to pay, to put my younger boy in infant care, in Florida, which is the most expensive type of daycare that you can get is infant care, I would pay on average over $9,000 a year. For my 18-month-old, I would pay over $7,000 a year. Now, when when we had to work out our budget and do all the number business that my husband's better at than I am, that came out to be about 57% of my salary, which would leave me with about $240 a week to add to my husband's salary. Now, if I were a single mom, that means I would only have $240 for me and my children to live on per week. It's just mind-blowing that it is this way. But because of the cost of childcare, my husband and I decided together that I would stay home. Now, I know that I'm coming from a place of privilege in order to stay home with my children, and it's been an enormous blessing to be able to do that. But as you can imagine, financially, it's hard. Single income families they really struggle. But my situation is really not an anomaly. Mothers face not only societal pressures to conform to their roles as parents and workers, but also major economic issues in becoming mothers. Issues like unaffordable childcare, unpaid maternity leave, and low-paying, inflexible jobs, which is what we're seeing now with this pandemic. It's kind of coming to light. And this, by no means, is an exhaustive list. I mean, we could go on. But in my research, I found that second wave and Marxist feminists have really worked together to ensure that women can join the workforce, which is amazing. But they have really done little to alleviate some of those underlying issues that mothers face as wage earners. And I argue that feminism as a whole, firstly, presupposes that motherhood is a bondage from which all women must escape. Secondly, it doesn't really grapple with the patriarchal image of the ideal worker. And lastly, it presupposes that all mothers desire to work. And so I'll be exploring these concepts like institutional motherhood, wage earning, and others, as well as how these unaddressed concepts really affect the intersectional identities of mothers, resulting in many just rejecting feminism as a whole. So as we know, throughout most of history, the patriarchal institution of motherhood relegated women to be solely responsible for child rearing and forced mothers to put their families first at risk of their own mental health and well-being. In many ways, we still see this institution at work, even now. But second wave feminists like Adrienne Rich, she says in her book Of Woman Born that I realized that I was effectively alienated from my real body and my real spirit by the institution, not the fact, of motherhood. Betty Friedan in The Feminist Mystique explores the problem that has no name. Rich does give a name to Friedan's nameless problem. She calls it the institution of motherhood. And in these passages alone, there are really some strong descriptors for what the institution of motherhood does to us as mothers. It alienates us and causes us to feel desperate, and it silences us. And Rich wasn't alienated from her children or her husband or her extended family and friends. No, she was isolated from her own body and her spirit, essentially herself. Another way to interpret alienated is to say that she transferred ownership of herself to someone or something else. And that is the institution of motherhood, what she calls the foundation of human society. So Rich exposes the facade of motherhood. For Rich, the institution of motherhood used everything from booklets in her obstetrician's office to artwork to novels to all to guilt her into complying and being this ideal compliant housewife and mother. In effect, the patriarchal society assaulted women with these venerated images like the perfect silent Madonna. When reality actually shows, of course, that Mary had to change diapers and spit up just like everybody else did and does. So by second wave feminists sharing their personal experiences, by making the political personal, by breaking this gag order, Rich and others are really illuminating the effects of the institution of motherhood. Now, the patriarchy suffered a blow when women gained rights, the vote, even a brief glimpse into the workforce. And so it resituated the battlefield back to the place where women had always complied in the past: motherhood and their children. So suddenly the patriarchy said, okay, white middle class women, because of course lower class women had to work whether or not they wanted to, that white middle class women or mothers could certainly have a career, absolutely, but a good mother would stay home to rear her children to the point of sacrificing herself to the needs of her children and her family. Now, that's when the workforce once again became the escape from these women's stifling lives as mothers. And this is what breaking that gag order really helped women to be able to just talk about the institution of motherhood and its effects on their lives. So Marxist feminists, to move forward a little bit, Marxist feminists like Heidi Hartman fought for women to join the workforce and really explored how men have used motherhood as a means of controlling women's labor and wage earning. Hartman addresses the fact that mothers in the workforce are doubly burdened both by motherhood and by wage earning. She says that the material base of the patriarchy then does not rest solely on child rearing in the family, but on the social structures that enable men to control women's labor. Now, I take a little bit of an issue with the term women's labor. It's just really not enough. Women have always labored. So a more pointed term would be women's wage earning. Now, like I said, women have always labored, but we've not always been compensated with fair wages. I mean, we don't even have to go into the fair part yet, but even wages in general, we have not always received those for our labor. So let's put the idea of wages versus labor into more current terms. A recent study that was quoted in the New York Times found that if American women earned minimum wage for their unpaid labor, for the work for caring for their families, like, for their children or husbands or elderly parents or family members, they would have earned roughly $1.5 trillion last year. I mean, that's a lot of zeros. Now, globally, if you pull that out, that comes out to be $10.9 trillion, which is just mind-blowing. For even more perspective into that, that's more than the 50 biggest companies in the world made last year. So when we talk about, labor and earning a wage, I just want to make sure you have that for a perspective. So once again, Hartman is really pointing out that by controlling women's wage earning, men have prevented women from gaining independence by excluding women from access to necessary economically productive resources that would, of course, allow her to earn a wage, which would allow her to gain independence. So those kind of resources are things like access to affordable childcare or jobs with equal pay for women and men. So the focus then became, how do we get women into the workforce and alleviate the burdens of child rearing? Well, the solution was the breakdown of the nuclear family. But even today, as we all know, households predominantly require two incomes to survive and thrive. Marxist feminists really fail to realize that the workforce is founded on privileging the father as the ideal worker. And so because this image was not altered, mothers cannot really achieve economic independence. So moving forward into more contemporary feminism, we can now look at third wave feminism, which really, unfortunately, learns very little from its predecessors. The issues of institutional motherhood and the patriarchal workforce really continue to be ignored in third wave feminist texts like the Motherhood Manifesto. What this text succeeds at, which is great, is recognizing the diverse issues mothers face. The authors understand that by tackling these interconnected problems together, rather than in isolation, we can create a more powerful system for support for families. Now, note that they're looking for systems that support families in any form that takes, not necessarily breaking down the nuclear family. I mean, this slight shift really shows that the authors know the struggles that mothers are facing across the board. But much like its predecessors, the manifesto really just tackles the lack of resources that prevent women from entering the workforce with more policy changes, which are absolutely necessary. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But my issue is that we're relying on a patriarchal government to change their rules for our benefit. I mean, we cannot solely rely on that happening. We have to change the culture. Again, talking about making sure we tackle these problems together rather separately. We have to have multiple fronts. So, like I said, we have to change the culture, and we as mothers, we rear each generation of humanity. I mean, what an awesome responsibility and opportunity. I mean, we are the catalyst for social change. Now, the patriarchal institution of the workforce really remains unchallenged in any of the texts, even in the Motherhood Manifesto. As workers, women have economic value, and that's whether you're in a socialist society or a capitalist society, because there's always a catch, provided that we can conform to the model of the ideal worker, which is a problem. The ideal worker is still a man, specifically a father who leaves the personal, meaning the family, at home, and he dedicates his life to his job. Fathers are paid more and are considered more hireable and competent than childless men. So good for fathers, right? Now, you would think it would be the same for moms, but the fact is that mothers receive fewer promotions and face wage penalties compared to childless women. Yeah, so women are penalized monetarily for becoming mothers. This is appropriately called the motherhood penalty. Even between mothers and non-mothers, there's a 13-cent wage gap. So if a non-mother makes on average 81 cents to a man's dollar, that means a mother makes 68 cents to a man's dollar. Now, to shed light on this insane gap, the mother wage gap comes out to be $18,000 annually. Imagine what a mom could do to support her children with $18,000 in her bank account. This is just... So this devastating gap is in place because mothers are thought to be not as dedicated to their careers. And they violate this ideal worker norm of always being there for the employer. So in other words, because the patriarchal workforce demands that women choose an institution, their own jobs, the company, that could replace her with so little effort or even consideration over her own children and her own family. We're not the ideal worker, so we don't get the wages that we deserve. So the workforce really has not moved beyond the family wage system that Hartman decries. She comes hard against this family wage system. And this system keeps women from earning fair wages, which keeps them from being equal partners in the home and in society. So certainly we have definitely made some strides in getting women resources to join the workforce, and earn a wage, have a semblance of independence. But we've really done nothing more than double a mother's labor. We have to change this image of the ideal worker. It has to be overhauled. If we don't broaden this father privileging ideal worker image, if we don't shift our allegiances from businesses to our families as a society, we are just perpetuating a patriarchal institution that continues to subjugate families as a whole. But because we, as feminists, we didn't broaden this image of the ideal worker, moms now have to mold themselves to that very image, meaning they have to put work before their families. The outcome of this oversight is that women, in becoming mothers, suffer additional penalties, like an even wider wage gap than non-mothers. If we have to take off and don't have paid maternity leave, we don't make money for that period of time, which results in monetary losses that follow us into retirement. Okay? So in other words, because moms don't make as much as dads and even non-mothers, we can't save enough for retirement, which sets us up for a whole host of financial problems in the future. So, as I mentioned earlier, second wave feminists like Rich, they gave a voice to their entrapment in motherhood, which is exactly what we needed to hear. But they did so not realizing the shaky ground that they were on. Hartman, however, she does notice there's something wrong. She notes that the radical socialist, communist, or Marxist wing of the women's movement has lost momentum, while the bourgeois sector seems to have seized the time and forged ahead. And we see this now, but when a movement stops being representative of those it wants to help, people are just going to stop listening. They're going to move on. Our mothers of feminism have fought for us, their daughters, to gain economic independence from men through wage earning. But we forgot not only the subtleties of patriarchal rage, but we've forgotten to take the ordinary and the everyday into account. We've forgotten that there is a difference between motherhood and the patriarchal institution of motherhood. And because of that, we've forgotten that in the ordinary and the everyday, most mothers find the fact of motherhood fulfilling, rewarding, and life-alteringly empowering. They've forgotten that motherhood is intensely personal. The veil of this good mother that the institution of motherhood wore is really being torn aside. I mean, there is an emerging push for mothers to understand that, we are not alone in our struggles. And this is with everything from dealing with low milk production to moms who don't feel a bond with their infants right away. I mean, these things were not spoken of. They were taboo years ago. But these emerging voices, these everyday women, they don't identify as being feminists. And so we feminists have forgotten that once a mother or a woman becomes a mother, that fact, it becomes a vital part of her intersectional identity. And in doing so, feminism loses its appeal and its relevance to everyday women. They can't identify with feminism because feminism doesn't identify with her. So feminism's greatest misunderstanding is that motherhood is oppressive and stifling. And as I mentioned previously, women have been denied independence on the grounds that motherhood prevents them from working. And repeatedly, motherhood is blamed for women's dependence on men. Rich at least makes a distinction when she says that I realized that I was effectively alienated from my real body and my real spirit by the institution, not the fact of motherhood. And those three little words, not the fact, meaning being a mother, is interjected for emphasis that is just quickly overlooked, almost like a parenthetical. Most feminists, however, don't even provide that distinction. For Rich, being a mother wasn't stifling. This institution, the foundation of society as we know it, allowed her only certain views and certain expectations that were embodied in every perfect mother idol. It was the institution that allowed, and the institution that restricted her, not her children. It was, but for the sake of maybe wordiness, or maybe even repetition, the full institution of motherhood is truncated to just motherhood. Or in some cases, most cases, simply called motherhood. And so without intending to, these kinds of statements imply that having children, the state of being a mother, is to blame. So being a mother should be avoided. And we see this shift in statements like Jeffner Allen's, where she says that motherhood is dangerous to women. Allen even cites Simone de Beauvoir as cautioning women to not fall into the trap of children and marriage because childbearing at the moment is real slavery. Laying blame for women's subjugation on motherhood rejects a vital part of women's multifaceted identities while doing nothing to extricate the patriarchal reach within the institutions of motherhood and the workforce. Laying blame for women's subjugation on motherhood is a win for the patriarchy. Not only are women still the primary parent and a wage earner, but the power, now of course, with fewer responsibilities financially, that power still rests in the hands of the patriarchy. We have merely added to our own burdens. So in addition to struggling with the workforce, we have to still be the primary parent. The one who stays at home from work when our little one's sick, which makes us, non-reliable, and therefore we don't get promotions and wages raises because we have to take care of sick children, which come first for us, right? We're also the ones who know when school projects are due and have to run out last minute to go get the supplies for it if it's late. We're the ones who comfort heartbreak. We're the ones who know our child's need just by the kind of cry they make from their crib. And as feminists and as society, we have to have a more inclusive image of motherhood. given the compounded duties as a worker and a mother, there's really little wonder why many women just want to opt out of working and stay home with their kids. But even without those issues working mothers face, many women just want to stay home with their kids. But given society's views that the best situation for a family is at least a part-time working mom, staying at home is now as frowned upon as going to work was 50 years ago. I mean, we have to give excuses for being stay-at-home mothers. Like, no one would really want to be around their kids that much because, of course, it's stifling and it's oppressive. Well, there must be something wrong with you. So, because feminists have touted that motherhood is oppressive, we've forgotten the beauty in the relationship between mothers and our children. We've forgotten that awe-inspiring strength a biological woman's body possesses in birthing a child, or the bravery an adopted mother shows when she mothers an unwanted child. We've forgotten that terrible strength a mother exerts in watching her child leave home, the culmination of years of hard labor and love. And we've forgotten that motherhood doesn't really end when a child leaves home. Mothers are always and forever going to be mothers. We just move into a new stage of motherhood as the years go by. We have forgotten all that is good and inspiring in motherhood. And in so doing, we have allowed the institution of motherhood to supersede the fact of motherhood. And in this hopefully temporary amnesia, we have devalued the art of motherhood and raised up labor and making money as the ultimate realization of womanhood. Now, let me be clear here. Okay, we are more than our children, just as we are more than our paychecks. And until we realize and recognize the gaps in our theory on motherhood, we are going to continue to miss the mark as each wave of feminism has. We have to stop predicating our entire theory on motherhood on the misunderstanding that motherhood's the problem. It's not. It's the patriarchal institution of motherhood that's the problem. And in supporting working mothers, we have to create a family-centric image of the ideal worker. Being a father doesn't make a man any more of an ideal worker than being a mother makes a woman a less reliable one. And in dismantling the stigma against motherhood, we have to accept that motherhood is multifaceted. That just as many women find their greatest fulfillment at home, raising their children, as there are women who are fulfilled by working outside the home. I mean, they're both doing everything they can to be the best moms they can be. Both of these choices are equally valuable and admirable. By rejecting the patriarchal institution of motherhood, by embracing the ordinary and the everyday, and by accepting the beautiful intersectionality of motherhood, we will finally be able to reclaim the fact of motherhood. So, thank you for your time and the opportunity to share my findings with you. I wish you and your families a safe and healthy day.